All right, which animals add more joy to the world, squirrels or llamas?
Okay, so I'm going to admit something really personal here.
Okay, I'm ready.
Squirrels scare me. Hi, I'm Tianna.
Hi, I'm Madison. And today we're going to be talking about the past, the present, the future, our experiences with animal health, and how our different roles at WOAH can take inspiration from each other.
That's right. We're also going to talk about how our expertise in WOAH can be in synergy with one another.
All right.
Let's go.
Ready to go?
Yep.
Okay.
So Madison, some tough questions here for you.
Okay.
Talking or texting?
Tianna, I'm a true millennial. I have to say texting.
I would have guessed.
Prefer it. Yeah.
And your favorite day of the week?
Friday, without a question.
Hands down?
Absolutely. It's the most fun.
TGIF, they don't have
Absolutely.
it for nothing. So the last question for you.
Okay.
Super tough. Remote or in person?
Ooh, this is a very relevant question. There are so many benefits of remote, being able to talk with people in other countries, different time zones, but nothing really beats in person. Having in-person events, in-person meetings where you can discuss organically and naturally and bounce ideas off each other in a very dynamic way. Makes me think of the Global Conference for Emergency Management that we hosted in April of this year. And it felt like this energy and this rebirth that people had after so many remote meetings, just to be able to come together and talk about important issues face to face.
Yeah, for sure. But who doesn't love remote a little bit from time to time, right?
Absolutely. It is nice to be at home and wear some comfy clothes and just have coffee by at all times.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, now it's your turn.
Okay.
Very tough questions.
I know.
Here we go. Name a word that starts with the letter Q.
Quadripartite.
Oh, Tianna, so on brand.
Giveaway, right?
It really is. Okay. All right, which animals add more joy to the world, squirrels or llamas?
Okay, so I'm going to admit something really personal here.
Okay, I'm ready.
Squirrels scare me.
All right.
Yeah, I grew up on the west coast of Canada. There's squirrels everywhere.
Yeah.
And they have attitudes.
Oh, yes, those Canadian attitude squirrels, absolutely.
They don't apologize. The only Canadians that don't apologize. So they bring me no joy.
Okay, and llamas?
Llamas, you gotta love a llama.
Absolutely, there we go. And lastly, I think this is also a personal question for you. Poultry raised in cages or free range?
So you know I have chickens. I have 6.
Okay.
And they're yard birds living their best lives.
Yeah.
The thing is, the most interesting thing about that's coming out with chickens these days is how we're communicating with them.
Okay, in what way?
Machine learning, through some machine learning, artificial intelligence.
Okay.
We're starting to decode what they're saying, or what they're clucking about,
Excellent.
as well as their behaviors. And like, if you think about that for a minute, like, where's that going to take us in terms of animal health and welfare,
Yeah,
that type of
absolutely.
thing? And I know, like, what if we can communicate with them how you and I are communicating? I know my kid would love to do that.
Absolutely, and that leads me right into our next section where we're going to play a little game.
Okay.
So we've pre-selected a couple of photos that I'm going to show you, and then you're going to tell me a little bit about them, and then you'll do the same for me.
Okay.
So, first photo, probably one of my favorites. Tell me a little bit about this.
This is Lila, my daughter, and her chicken Baltazar.
Did she name it?
She did. She wanted a white
excellent.
chicken. When we
Okay.
decided to get chickens, she wanted a white chicken, and his name was going to be Baltazar.
Wonderful.
I know, right?
Very good.
All right, your turn.
Okay.
Look at this little cutie. Oops. This little cutie right here. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, oh my goodness. I think I must have been 3 years old, and my family had just got this outdoor cat, which is very common in, the Canadian sort of rural country. And this cat's name was Mickey, like the mouse, but for a cat, and didn't like anybody. And as a 3-year-old, I was determined to make this cat love me, and I succeeded.
I can tell.
Thank you.
He's playing dead.
Yeah, she was very, very happy. Yeah.
So we're both born and raised in Canada.
Absolutely, we are.
Where are you born and raised?
City close to Toronto. So in the province of Ontario,
Yep.
sort of like the middle bit there. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think you worked there for a time.
Yes, I did.
And you?
I grew up on the West Coast, where the squirrels have attitudes and
Exactly.
they don't apologize
Yeah,
for
that's
anything.
beautiful
Yeah.
out there.
But I spent, as you said, just as you were saying, I spent a lot of time in Ottawa.
Yeah, excellent. And that was before then you came to Paris.
Exactly. Yeah, I was in the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, so what would be considered the veterinary services for Canada. And I worked for Dr. Brian Evans, who was delegate here for a number of years.
Oh, very good.
Before he retired. Yeah. And then, yes, I had a little break. I think I was like, my first general session was 2006.
Okay.
Had a break of between 2014 and 2015, and then I was back at it in 2016.
Excellent. Well, Paris and WOAH are lucky to have
Yeah,
you.
exactly. All right, so next photo.
Okay.
What you doing here?
Oh yes, that was just this year. So this is at the United Nations, one of those with big rooms, quite intimidating. And I was asked to come and present at the second working group meeting to strengthen the Biological Weapons Convention. So I presented and then was part of a panel for 2 different sessions. This one was on translating science-based evidence into policy and how that could be helpful for countries who are trying to implement the Biological Weapons Convention, which basically says to not make or distribute biological weapons, good things. And then I was also part of a panel discussion on WOAH's activities and how they contribute to the implementation of the convention. So it's quite exciting. I've been in this sort of emergency management, biothreat reduction project officer role for about a year. And to be able to go speak at the UN in front of states parties and represent WOAH and what we do was quite exciting.
Yeah, something to call your mom about.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I sent many a picture to the family group chat. Going back to the texting.
Very exciting. Thanks, Megs.
And so going back to you, so you said you worked at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency for a time, and then you were also head of the Preparedness and Resilience Department here at WOAH for a bit. That was before I joined, unfortunately. But tell me a little bit about that. I also have a picture documenting this over the years.
My many haircuts.
Yes, exactly.
Still a little bit blonde, but yeah, my many haircuts.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was the head of what was before the Preparedness and Resilience Department.
Yeah.
So before coming to WOAH, as you said, I was at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency from 2003 until 2014, I think it was. And my roles there evolved and changed over time, but it sort of seemed, as soon as I arrived, the animal health emergencies started happening. It had nothing to do with me, but really in 2003, 2004, so 2003 was mad cow disease or BSE, and then 2004 was avian influenza for the first time in Canada, so both first times for Canada. And my role at that time was not in the Emergency Operations Center, but really as a coordinator.
Okay, coordinating who and what?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we had a minister's office that needed to know everything that was going on during the unfolding of this emergency for the political media type of relations and things like this. So I worked in the Issues Coordination Unit. I know, a very fancy title.
Very formal.
However, so I was interfacing a lot with our National Emergency Operations Center, with our President's office, to understand what was happening, what were the situational reports, and report back to the Minister's office, and then have that flow of information going and just keeping them at bay for a little bit.
Right, making sure they knew what they need to in order to act appropriately.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then I went into the Canadian Delegate's office.
Okay.
So Dr. Evans was our Chief Veterinary Officer for Canada at that time when BSE and avian influenza was just exploding.
Yeah.
And he was also delegate to this organization. So I was in his office. I worked in his office from 2006 until, I think, 2013 or something like this. So really the head of looking at what are the standards that are coming out, contributing to them, coordinating them across the comments across Canada. So collecting the information from our livestock industry, what they wanted to see, what was coming up from them, also from our scientific network, etc. And would feed those comments back into our standards department here at WOAH.
Excellent. Yeah. Very good link. So then when you arrived to WOAH and were head, or I guess OIE at that time, and then were head of the department, did you face any emergencies at that time?
Yeah, I mean, animal health is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, seven-day-a-week job. Yep. So there was some coordination with FAO, with the Crisis Management Center and the emergency, which later became the Emergency Management Center. So again, this idea of understanding what was going on in the countries, where they needed some intervention or what have you, some support. So yeah, it felt constant. There was a constant movement of people, information, etc. So I think emergencies has kind of been a part of, my career when I started in animal health.
Yeah, it sure sounds like it. Yep. Excellent.
And for you, I guess that's on your plate.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I mentioned, I work in the Preparedness and Resilience Department, and I'm a project officer for biological threat reduction, also working on different activities related to emergency management. Since being in this role, I haven't had to face any significant emergencies. I somehow missed out on the COVID-19 pandemic response that WOAH had. But I think it's easy to say that looking at, the current atmosphere, looking at, how things are evolving now, there will be an emergency up and coming. Whether that's for WOAH, if it's for our member countries, for the veterinary services who need to respond, the things that they need to respond to are just going to increase in severity and frequency, and WOAH needs to be able to help them with that, whether that's through capacity building and preparedness, whether that's direct response, but we need to figure that out. And that was a big learning after the COVID-19 pandemic, and understanding what we did well, what we could learn from, and that's sort of what we're starting to work on now.
Well, Madison, hang around. You're bound to run into an emergency or two.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there are two activities. You were just talking about the work that you're doing, and there's two activities that stand out for me because I was somehow associated with them. One of them is the Phoenix exercise. And the other is the first, I emphasize the first, Global Conference on Emergency Management.
Yes, absolutely. So the Phoenix exercise, or Exercise Phoenix, was an international simulation exercise. So it was over 3 different regions with multiple countries in each region, and it happened at the same time. The idea was really to foster this collaboration between the veterinary services and law enforcement. So it used a scenario that needed both sectors to respond and to work together. And so the idea really was to help them better understand how to work together, who to talk to, how to talk to each other in this type of event. And then the next part of Exercise Phoenix was between international organizations, so between WOAH, the FAO, and Interpol, to discuss how would we respond to this type of scenario? What would we do? How would we talk to each other? What would we be able to share with each other? And to start thinking about it and building those links so that if something ever happens, or when something happens, we know how to respond quickly and effectively.
Fantastic.
So that's Exercise Phoenix. And then the second one was the Global Conference.
Exactly.
Yeah. That was very, very exciting. Like I mentioned at the beginning, one of the first in-person events that WOAH has had since 2020. And it was really exciting. We got to bring together the veterinary services, we got to bring together law enforcement, get them all in a room and talk about emergency management. Talk about the different phases of that, whether that's preparedness, response, recovery, how they're each involved, where the overlaps are, why they need to work together. And from that, we developed some key action points on what that should look like. A lot of the calls for action were on how to work with other sectors to really encourage that. Veterinary services play a really critical role in responding to emergencies, whether it's directly impacting the animal sector or it's a secondary impact. And we really want to encourage them to be included into these national frameworks for emergency management. So that's a big one. Another one is looking at new and emerging threats.
Yes.
Things that are coming up, that we might not have thought about before, but are becoming important issues. So things like cybersecurity. What does that look like for the veterinary services to respond to a cybersecurity threat?
Yeah, we're all digital, most of us.
Well, exactly.
Not the entire world. But.
Exactly, yeah. So how can we as WOAH look at these threats that are coming up, and then how can we help our members, find the best practices, or how can we work with them to identify what's important, what their needs are, so that we can kind of face these things together.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
That was a fun conference. I was part of that too.
Yes, you were. You had a side event, if I remember correctly.
Yes, I did.
Absolutely.
On foresight.
Exactly.
Using foresight scenarios.
Yes. And, that's a great lead-in, because thinking about foresight, the future, like, what do you see as the challenges or the areas where we can improve our resilience and get us to reflect on really what lies ahead?
Well, I have this crystal ball here. No, I'm kidding.
I knew it.
I know everybody thinks that it's all about crystal balls, and somebody who's doing foresight somehow has a better hold on what is happening long term, or better hold on uncertainty, which is not the case. It's more like...
It's so easy, though.
It would be so easy if we had all that information right in our hands, and that we could, had one person who could tell us all that. That's not how it works at all. So to answer your question, I am the lead now. We're leading on foresight work.
And foresight being, how would you define this?
Well, how I define this, it's a toolbox. It's a set of methodologies, and in the scientific world, we are used to methodologies, or even in the social science world, we're used to certain methodologies and frameworks. And this is not that different, in the sense that we sort of look at what's coming towards us. We get to dig into it, question it. What could this possibly mean for us as an organization? Right. So similar to what you're doing about these emerging threats, the methodologies within foresight, we can do that as well. And I'm not going to go through the whole list of them, but we are able to kind of project ourselves a little bit into the future as well, and imagine consequences and impacts, unintended or positive, negative. What could make this worse? What could make this better? That type of thing. So there's many ways to use foresight, and I see how we can use it in this organization. Especially in an organization where we're very much used to looking at risk. And we use things like risk assessments and risk analysis. We use modeling, disease modeling, forecasting, monitoring, epidemiological surveillance. We have a sense of the foreseen, the risks that are already here, and foresight. And we do work with a little bit of uncertainty in those types of frameworks.
Absolutely.
But foresight kind of extends out that uncertainty. We love uncertainty in foresight. The more uncertainty, the better.
Right. It's good that somebody likes it, because it makes most people a bit nervous.
A bit nervous. Because, well, we can just play around with that uncertainty. Yeah. Nobody knows what the future is going to hold. We don't know how it's going to turn out. So why not use that uncertain space to say, okay, let's ask ourselves some questions around what if? What if this thing does arrive? What does that mean for us as an organization? Absolutely.
And I suppose it's better to be doing this during peacetime, as we like to say, rather than in the midst of some sort of crisis. But how could we take this approach and apply it to emergency management, for example?
Oh, perfect question. Right? So you can think about something even in incident management. In an incident management system, usually it's set up, as you said, during crises. How can you use it during peacetime? There are a few things. You can look at it you can use foresight methodologies in a tactical kind of manner. So when you're in the thick of it, you can throw something down like a point of impact wheel and say, here's our situation. What's the first order, second order, and third order impacts of this situation? And sort of add other things to it, like what's politically happening that will impact this situation? What is happening in the environment? Like it could be a weather event that's you're seeing come along. Okay, well, this is going to make this situation worse. How is it going to make it worse? How would we be able to kind of act in the middle of things? So it's helpful in a little bit of risk assessment, the situational awareness piece, and then there's the strategic piece.
Okay, and what does that look like then?
What does that look like then? That is more of a sitting back and imagining multiple futures. Okay. So normally in emergency management, we're probably just thinking about the next emergency.
Exactly.
But we're not really quite sure where it's coming from, but we have enough signals around us to tell us, well, you know, something from a technological perspective or a social perspective could give rise to an emergency. And especially if you're thinking something like, for example, if you're thinking agroterrorism, bioterrorism, that type of thing, having a look at some signals that are coming towards you, like some social movements that are coming. You're starting to see certain things coming in the environment that tell you that maybe there's some rumblings around here that could lead to, you know, a possible event.
Sure. So that would really play then into the preparedness piece and understanding what's coming, how we can prepare ourselves for it.
Right.
And then in the response as well.
Yeah, exactly. So the thing is, like, when you're looking at foresight scenarios, you're imagining what that future would look like with that social thing happening, with that political thing happening, or technological. What does that future look like? And you're in the emergency management center. This is coming towards you. You think, okay, well, what do I need to adapt to this situation? What are the capabilities or the capacities? What are the gaps that we have in our current structure that make us vulnerable to not being able to respond to this? And so where do we need to invest? So it's taking a whole different take on emergency management into a level where it's like thinking broad and wide and long term.
Right.
Which we don't always do.
No, it's true. You know, and thinking about broad and long term, you had mentioned the machine learning and the artificial intelligence in terms of decoding what chickens are potentially like feeling or saying. Where do you think that's going?
Well, I mean, honestly, Madison, that can go in several directions.
Okay.
So as I mentioned, it was, you know, maybe what are the implications for animal health and welfare? You know, if we might be hearing things in a production system, small, large, or whatever it might look like, might be hearing things there and thinking, okay, maybe that's an indicator of the health of the animals or the welfare of the animals. So, you know, you can go in many different directions from that. Also, just our general communications with animals. Like, where are we as humans in the broader animal kingdom? So that can kind of change our social values, our cultures, and things like that.
Oh, it's very interesting thought experiments to sort of undertake and to put yourself in.
Exactly. And actually, interestingly, just a little bit related to this, in 2021, with UNESCO, we held a futures literacy laboratory. So I'll give you an example of a scenario that we used, a future scenario. In this future, animals tamed humans. And as you can imagine, that people would have a hard time imagining that type of future, right? Like,
absolutely, it feels so out of the box.
Yeah, it's far-fetched, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, will that ever happen? Like, why would we even have to worry about that? How did that happen? Where did that happen? Instead of looking at that scenario as something of, well, it's just a future. Nobody's saying that it's going to come true. It's not a prediction. Let's just explore it. Like, how are we communicating with those animals? Or how are they communicating with us? And funny, this is 2021, keep in mind. Machine learning and artificial intelligence didn't even come up.
Interesting.
Yep, it is quite interesting. But again, the whole scenario was really to explore and test our assumptions on what it means to be WOAH in that type of future.
Absolutely.
So we're testing our assumptions around what are animal perspectives. We were just flipping it around on its head and saying, what are the animal perspectives? How are they perceiving their own health and welfare? It was just to test things out a little bit. So that's another way of using the future, really using a what-if, far-fetched scenario and see what happens.
Oh, that's great. I think that's such a, for WOAH to be able to look forward and to talk about what we want the organization to look like in the future. I think you're well placed to help guide those conversations to happen. Right,
because foresight is a little bit about also, like, we're all thinking about the future. And those images and perceptions that we have inside, foresight is another way of getting that stuff out. And that diversity of perspectives is super important, you know, as a collective, to identify, you know, where we want to go. What do we want to do?
Well, this has been fun. And I guess, you know, all the best for all your foresight work coming up.
Yeah, thank you, Madison. I'm looking forward to working more with you as well of how we can integrate foresight into emergency management.
Absolutely. And I guess also thinking ahead, 2024, WOAH turns 100. What would you wish for WOAH's anniversary and, you know, for the upcoming years, for the next 100 years?
That's a big question and a good question. Well, I hope that WOAH doesn't hang on to one future because there are many out there, and to look at the signals, the information coming from our members as well, and how to adapt and be the organization, the best organization that it can be for its members.
100% agree. Yeah, I hope that WOAH continues to support and work with and for our members and see what we can do for the veterinary services.
You bet.
All right, excellent. I guess we say bye?
Yes, we say bye.
Bye.